Uh, I thought I would begin with just a few quotations that I looked up. Uh, uh, just independently, I've been thinking for weeks about just what was on my mind, what others might be thinking about, wondering about, what I might share. And then I saw that the readings for this week actually tied in very well with that. In the Ray's reading, it said, "Yet hard the wise Mahatma is to find, that man who saith all is Vasudev." And from the affirmation reading, humility is the realization that nothing in this shadow world of appearances is all that important, except as it draws us closer to the Lord. I think this has been a time where our ability to fully embrace those thoughts has been challenged by what's going on in all around us. I won't go into details. We're all very familiar with it. Just the absolute social dysfunction that we see, the disharmony that we see, the anger that we see, and what is the source of this? I think. Well, here was the first quote of Swamiji's that I wanted to read. The secret of success is a preference for the truth over mere opinion, even if the opinion be your own. And it's a wonderful thought, and isn't it exactly the antithesis of everything we see going around us nowadays? Most people, even if they think of themselves as religious, are much more interested in their own opinions than in anything that God might have to say about what's going on. And of course, this is universally rooted in our society now, so it feeds on itself. I was reminded when I was in high school, I used to play bridge quite seriously. I was a good bridge player, and we used to play in the local club. And at the end of the hand, it's quite common or at the end of the round, for the players to have what they call a post-mortem, to go over the hand, what went right, what went wrong, what was interesting. And sometimes these competitive events don't bring out the best in people. Sometimes they get rather accusatory, argumentative with their partners. What I found was interesting was that the husband, often there would be married couples playing. The husband might lead right off by accusing his wife of having done a terrible thing with that lead she made on trick 3. And in fact, because, these were not good players, that was actually one of the few good things that either one of them had done on that hand. But the wife didn't know it either. So, she, so as to defend herself, she criticizes the husband for doing something. They had no idea what was going on in the hand, but it didn't stop them from speaking just so energetically, angrily. And it reminds me of just what we see going around us now. People take themselves so seriously. It gives what's going on an added magnetism. And yet, how must it look, from a God's eye view? We're just a bunch of yammering teenagers, who have no idea what's going on. And all just not searching for the truth, just saying whatever they can to try and justify the opinions they have. And it's not surprising, of course, because we're very early in Dwapara Yuga. This is basically the teenager stage. So what I wanted to read a few quotes just to kind of begin to demagnetize this public square that we're just inundated with all the time. A better name for it might be, unfortunately nowadays, might be a public boxing ring. It's not communication, it's just conflict. one thing to remember is Swamiji often used to say, the majority is almost always wrong. And don't we see that today? In the peace treaty, he had a humorous section where the fellow says, when popular opinion stirs the pond, what rises to the surface is not perfume, but the fetid stench of error. And it reminded me of a quote you may remember that Master cited in the AY. It's an old Persian proverb that says, look in the sky to find the moon, not in the pond. And of course, this is what Ananda is about. We're all about trying to raise our consciousness to find the truth in the sky, essentially, not in this lower world that we're inhabiting at the moment. This is a quote out of I think it's Conversations. The master had been speaking of God and spiritual subjects one evening. Gradually, the talk shifted to political concerns. The master paused, then said with a laugh, from God to politics, such is the power of his Maya, cosmic illusion. And I hope, by the way, that you're all, if you're not already reading Jyotish and Devi's weekly blogs, I very much encourage you to do it. Part of what encouraged me to take up this subject today is because I've seen the theme that they're sounding so often in their own blogs. It showed me that I'm not the only one who's struggling with the attraction that that all this disharmony going around us has on us. Jyotish wrote in one of maybe his most recent blog, this may come as a shock to you, but you aren't responsible for the world's welfare. It is enough to take responsibility for your own well-being and try to help those who are in your circle of influence. Leave the rest to God. And his words were very well chosen because, of course, our path is a path of meditation, but of service. And so naturally, we do want to help people around us. And he's not saying that we shouldn't be involved, but he's telling us to limit our efforts at help to helping those who are in our circle of influence. There are some people who are called to political missions. Mother Teresa was one such person. Maybe many of you know the reason that she did what she did was not because of any political predisposition, but it was because Jesus came to her and told her that this is how he wanted her to serve. And so she did that because it was her divine mission, not because of any independent attraction to political involvement. And I asked myself when I read what Jyotish said, because I don't know about you. I mean, I see these discussions that go on, these arguments that go on, and I want to engage people. I kind of want to shake them and say, no, that doesn't make any sense at all, and naturally, in our age, back in the Middle Ages, people of spiritual commitment, what they needed to do was withdraw into monasteries. The world was a very dark place, and it wasn't going to be constructive to engage with it. In our times, it's a little bit different. We still see there's plenty of darkness around us, but there's much more openness to working in the world. And obviously that's what our path is about. But what was my thought there? Let me gather my thought. Oh, I lost it.
You were talking about wanting to talk to Jyotish and Devi about wanting to talk to people about how they're responding to current environment. And maybe what did they say to you when you asked?
No, I didn't discuss that with them. It was obvious. So for us, on the one hand, we do need to, we do engage in a way that people didn't in the Middle Ages. But in another sense, we need to be very careful about the way we do it, because there's still a lot of darkness in the world. And we've seen, especially during these last 2 years, how strong its power is. And we need to be careful not to be drawn in to its way of looking at things, but instead, of course, to remain centered in our own understanding of truth, in our own understanding of what it is that God and gurus have given us to do. And in that way, we can truly help people. And but to get drawn in sort of on other people's terms is much more than a waste of energy. It's much worse than that. It's and it's utterly futile. And I don't know. So just looking at things in these ways helped to demagnetize, for me at least, and I hope by my sharing these thoughts a little bit for you, the pull that these things otherwise exercise on us. I had just a few other quotes to share. This is things that Swami wrote in his introduction to the Peace Treaty. He wrote, "Peace is a product of outer harmony among people, which in turn is a product of inner harmony in human beings. Such harmony is impossible to achieve so long as people center their lives in desires and material greed. The way to get people to change their behavior is to inspire them to desire to change. One can't coerce others, not even for their own good. Today, unfortunately, selfishness stands as an insurmountable barrier to world peace." So I think it's going to help us a lot to relax into our center, to bear that very strongly in mind, clearly in mind, always. Swamiji and the great masters, all of our gurus, had a very, always took the long rhythm. They always had the long rhythm in mind, very long rhythms. Swami, he was, sometimes people used to criticize him for his use of the pronouns. Nowadays it's very common to say, each person, to each their own, people would say, instead of to each their own. Swami was in no rush to adopt new language like that, because he said it had a lot of problems to it as well. He said, after 100 years, if that's really become fully established, I'll adopt it. But it was 100 years. He tells a story in the path that some of you may remember. His friend and guru by there, Norman, got into a deep funk, and Swamiji was trying to console him, to lift his spirits. And he said, "Norman, how long can this last? 40, 50 years?" And just from Swami's point of view, this was a cheery point of view. Norman wasn't quite ready to embrace it in that spirit, but it's suggestive of the way that Swamiji looked at these things. We've been given, it's our great, great fortune. We're disciples of a great guru, and we're coming in at the beginning of a new era, the era of Dwapara Yuga, the age in which energy consciousness, in which people come increasingly to see that energy is the reality behind matter. Matter is only a limited expression of energy. And so Yogananda is introducing something entirely new into the world. Swami said he was the avatar of Dwapara Yuga. And these yugas last a long time. This one's going to last 2,400 years. We're right at the beginning. But he's sowing seeds, and we're sowing seeds. So they're not going to come into full flower right away. And yet what we're doing is very important and very meaningful. It lends meaning to we shouldn't despair at our inability to, sort of to shake people and get them to change, because the seeds that we're nurturing are going to have great effect on all of them, on many, many more people. Some of them right away. We're working with many people, and the people who are assigned in today, and increasingly more over time. But it takes time. So did I have another? Well, here's just a funny story I was thinking about. I was once living in a group house here, and someone had donated a statue that he had made of Master. And I'm not a sculptor. I admire. It's very hard to do well. You just need to get everything right. And there was a lot that was inspired in this statue. But he was not a professional sculptor, and he hadn't gotten it quite right. In particular, he really just hadn't done a good job on Master's nose. It was too big. It wasn't really attractive. It was overly prominent. And there were some people in the house who, excuse me, were feeling it had been offered as a gift to our house. So people felt, they didn't want to hurt the feeling of the sculptor. They were suggesting that we should display it prominently long-term in our living room. And I felt that this would really be really a disrespect to Master. It wasn't the right thing to do. And I just blurted out without thinking that if we have that statue there, I'll always feel that Master is smelling me. And once I said it, it made the statue ridiculous. It made it very clear we couldn't have that statue there. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do with the public square in this introduction. When you stand back from it, it's just ridiculous. And we should just sort of step aside and let it play itself out in the way that it needs to. And we should just go about our business. As Master often quoted Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, speaking to Arjuna, "Get away from my ocean of suffering and misery," And so this is what we should do. That's the ocean we see in our public square. So Swamiji wrote a beautiful, what is truth then? Obviously people here who are arguing in the name of truth, this is not truth at all. Swamiji wrote a beautiful short poem about that at a time in Ananda's history when we ourselves were subject to serious and disharmonious attack, on the part of others. And so he wrote, "What is truth? Truth is all embracing. Truth knows no barriers. It is therefore always kind. Truth fosters harmony, never disharmony. Unity, never disunity. Universal respect, never judgment or intolerance. Truth is ever beneficial. Its rays heal, though they cauterize our imperfections. Be wary of statements made in the name of truth if they lack charity. View skeptically such statements if they are self-serving. Should anyone, moreover, claim unique possession of a truth, turn apart and gaze up into the vast heavens. For truth is expansive, its native land is infinity. Truth inspires joy in our souls, even if we, in our human littleness, fear its liberating rays." And what struck me about this poem, perhaps it struck you too, is almost really every single line could have been a statement in reaction to what we see around us and what the divine alternative is. So we have different work to do, but it's challenging because delusion has its own magnetism. And I think we've all experienced that in the last couple of years. We've, I'd be surprised if you didn't experience it where you're living. We've experienced it even in a community like Ananda Village, where, by the way, I live. For those of you who don't know me, I've lived here for many years. I had the blessing for many years to be the secretary to Swami Kriyananda, and I'll draw on that a little bit in my talk. And it's just going to get, so delusion has its power, and that power is going to gather in the years to come. Yogananda predicted great cataclysms to come, and Swamiji echoed that often and strongly in his talks to us over the years. And so we are just getting started with what's happened in the last 2 years. So, of course, meditation is an absolutely essential bulwark against that. We've been given very, very great tools to help us win this battle against delusion. Many, the tools of meditation. I won't go into all of them, but we've been given something else, which, at least I, as I prepared for this talk, came to look at in a new way. And it is these world brotherhood colonies, as Master called them, of which he spoke with great fervor. Swami said that in the years that he was there with Master, it didn't matter what the topic of Master's talk was. He would turn to talk about with great urgency the importance of communities like this. And then towards the end, well, I shouldn't say like this, because he hadn't created communities. He just spoke about their importance. And then towards the end of the talk, he would sort of hastily bring it back to the announced topic and sort of tie it together. And I've often thought of these communities as, well, the ideal way for all of us to live in this, especially in this new age of Dwapara. But I see that in addition to that, it was Master's, the protection, the ammunition that he was giving us. It was his answer to how we live in a world of where delusion is so strong, how we remain centered and how we're able to serve in it. And there's a story that's told in the past, I think, maybe it's in the past, about someone who's trying to defeat some demon. And this is in India. And so he decides he's going to chant some Vedic incantations over some powder and then throw them on the demon. And he does that, and the demon just laughs. He says, I got into that powder before you chanted your chant. So how could it affect me? And this is the danger, that the mind is, lest the mind be already infected with the delusion that we're trying to counter. And living in a world like ours today, where delusion is so strong, that's a real danger for us. And so Yogananda, and really through Swami Kriyananda, Yogananda tried to start a community in his lifetime, and it failed in Encinitas. He surely knew it would fail. He was, showing all of us, for the future, how important it was. He was sowing seeds. He gave it to Swamiji, and this has been one of Swamiji's great missions in his life. And it would behoove us very much to tune deeply into Swamiji. It is, Master sent it. It's Master's vision. It's not Swamiji's vision. Master sent it through Swami. And we should tune into it in its completeness. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody at the village say this out loud, but I'm sure that everyone who had the blessing to live, especially at Ananda Village, but just to live, who got the chance to know Swami, who perhaps visited Ananda Village, we were living in a kingdom it was not like, you know, the sort of normal culture that you see in our world today. It was a culture more reflective, perhaps, of what people will live in the next and higher yuga. And it was a complete replacement for the culture that we have. Just in every way. I mean, we had our own holidays, we have our own music, we have our own art, we have our own customs. You know, we do everything in our own way. Everything we do, we spiritualize our businesses, everything. And it's not an accident, you know, that Master gave us something so all-encompassing, you know, because in that way we spiritualize every aspect of our lives. And, you know, in part, I'm preaching to the converted here. As I was saying, I enjoyed all of the announcements you made, Supriya. You know, you talked about musical events, you know, the wonderful affirmation you have about attracting World Brotherhood communities in their full expression to Dallas. And yet, you know, at least I've observed during the last few years, to some extent, I don't know, we've lost some of our focus that way. People, you know, instead of, for example, you know, what do you do? Should you get a vaccine? How do you want to figure that out? Well, one way to do it is to try and really deeply tune into what Master would say, what Swamiji would say, what would your guru say? You know, what did they say? What would they say? You know, and another way to do it is to tune into social media, you know, and social media has a lot of power. You know, I've observed it in Ananda. There are a number of people who say things and I know where they got it. They didn't get it by reading Master's books. They didn't get it by listening to Swami's talks. They were listening to people who, you know, are part of a culture that Master was trying to eclipse for us. So this is just these first 2 years have been instructive, and it's an invitation for us to sort of get back on center that way, because we're going to have much bigger challenges to come. And so I wanted to invite all of us, you know, especially life at the village is, and yeah, you know, look, to some extent, of course, you feel these things too, you know. Ananda communities have come to Dallas. You know, you're developing it, you know, in your own way. And I began to feel this, especially with Swamiji at the village. It felt like living in a fairyland, you know, and art was very important. You know, nowadays in our culture, you know, they're cutting all the funding for art in the schools. Art's of central importance. And Swami actually had put out strongly the energy he wanted to have a festival of the arts every year. And he started out doing that. It hasn't fully happened yet, but I'm sure it'll come back. Beauty was very important. I had an interest. In fact, I encourage all of you to come visit the village if you haven't had the chance, whenever you have the chance, in part because it's just a place of pilgrimage. It's a shrine. You know, Swamiji lived there, and many other great saints, I think, saints in the making at the very least, have lived there. Also to come see the tulips for how beautiful they are, the garden. One time, Swami often was able to read our thoughts, and I just was wondering why he was putting so much energy into these gardens. This was in the early days. No one was coming to see them. You know, they weren't nearly as developed as they are now. And it wasn't that I doubted that he was doing a good thing. I just didn't really understand why. Excuse me. And he explained, you know, answered my unspoken question, said, you know, when people come to Ananda, it's transforming for people. And, but what they're experiencing is subtle. It's abstract. Then they go home and it begins to slip through their fingers. It's hard to hold on to because of its abstraction. If they have an experience while they're here of real outward beauty, of an astral nature, but something they can really grab onto and hold on to. They take that home and it will forever be associated in their mind with the states of consciousness that they had a chance to experience. And so beauty was very important in everything that we did. In his writing, it was very important. And so, well, I'll go on from that. That was a main point. What else did I want to? There are just a few other points. I realize my time is running short here. Yes, I wanted to mention also that the books are very important. A lot of the younger people, even at Ananda Village, have not read most of Swamiji's books. But, as his secretary, when I would tune into the letters that people wrote, almost always there would be some book of Swami's that would just pop into and I would write and I would encourage them to read that book. He wrote some 150 books, but he wasn't wasting his time on any one of those books. He was a busy guy. Every one of those books was written for somebody, and many of those books were written for many people. And so I would, and one time actually, I was just taking a walk with Swami, and he changed the subject, and he said, most people, when they die, authors, end up being remembered for just one of their books, maybe a couple of them. And then he changed the subject right back. But he knew how I would react, because I'd worked a lot with his books. He knew I loved his books. I was practically screaming inside, not with your book, Swamiji, these books. And I think, until I thought about what I would say today, I thought of that as a message primarily to me. I'm now working with his books and helping to make them available to others. But I think it's a message he wanted me to share. So I would encourage you very much. It's a way to tune into him. He's very much alive for us now, even for those of us who didn't have the blessing of knowing him in the body. If you're not a reader, most of these books are recorded, so you can listen to them. Another way you can approach them that I'd highly recommend is to listen to the series that Nayaswami Asha in Palo Alto has done on almost all, well, at least many of Swamiji's books. That's another way, even if you're not going to read them, that you can tune into them. It's very inspiring and insightful. And I'll just end with one little personal story of Swamiji's that had metaphorical significance to me, but I think especially at this time it has metaphorical significance for all of us. I'd been in a mood, and I hadn't mentioned it to anybody, and I don't think most people would have noticed, but of course Swamiji knew. And I was proofreading his most recent book. And I was sitting in a room where the lights were, for whatever reason, dim, and I was working. And Swami walked into the room and said, "You need help." And he walked across the room and turned on the lights. So God bless you all. Thanks for the opportunity to share this morning with you.
Lakshman, thank you for turning on the light with us and sharing so many wonderful different thoughts. Certainly Swamiji's books, now in so many forms, whether it's Asha's classes or audio. I personally like the hard books. I have every one, and we do, when we had a center for 26 years, we had a nice boutique and had every one of Swamiji's books and encouraged, and that will come back. Even on retreat last weekend for Easter, we had brought some of the books that are in storage and had a little table, available for purchase right there, because we want to share Swami's, the inspiration that came from Master through Swamiji in these books are just incredible. And of course we used a lot of music too, because we always use Swami's music whenever possible, because as he said, if you want to get to know me, listen to my music. So we had a lot of Easter music with Jitendra and Sagar last week, and when we gather in person, which we are starting to do more now, even though we don't have a center yet, we do have a place we can rent and gather, and we do that twice a month at least. And we always try to have live music. Sometimes it's Maitri and me by myself. Sometimes it's a few other little people. We sing Swami's music because the vibration is so beautiful. And thank you just for, like I said, turning on the light for us. That was sweet that Swami just walked over and turned on the light for you physically, and I'm sure in many other ways turned on the light for you as you were proofreading that book. So let's see if anyone else would like to now either comment, ask questions. We don't live together in community here, but we certainly for 29 years have had this starting community with Pranaba and Parvati coming 29 years ago and are still in existence. We haven't missed a beat with the pandemic by the grace of God and Mark Smithheiser. He got us immediately online and classes and Sunday services. We haven't missed anything, and we're very, very grateful for all of that. So you're welcome to put anything in the chat. I'm getting ready to read something that's in the chat, but if anyone else wants to open cameras and mics, let's see if we have that capability. We do. I'm going to open your camera or mic if you want to say something, but here, this has come from the chat. It says, I have a question. When did you, Lakshman, come onto the path? Where were you born? What drew you to Ananda and Swami Kriyananda? Or how was your first episode at the village? So maybe give us a little bit of your background. That's what Alex is asking here. And how did you find Ananda too? So you're muted right now.
Well, thanks for your question. We don't have that much time, and that's a hard one to do in not very much time. I grew up in New Jersey, which is about as far away from Ananda as you can get geographically and in other ways. And I had the great blessing to be invited to visit Ananda by close friends of mine who had found it just a year before, at a time in my life when I'd always been seeking truth very much in my life. I didn't think in terms of God. That wasn't my upbringing, but I'm sure I brought this in with me, had the feeling that if I just understood things properly, the right way to lead my life, that was how you led your life, informed by truth, and that's what would lead to true happiness and fulfillment. And I'd reached a point in my life where nothing was working. I'd been a successful student. I'd completed a bunch of degrees, and I had just been at a prominent university, gotten my dream job, but then a strike broke out, and I supported the workers, so I went out on strike with them. We won the strike. It was national news. I went back into my department, welcomed, got the, victor's welcome. And, but it just felt hollow at that point. I realized I just didn't share anything very fundamental with the people with whom I was working. And what I was studying was, at that point, I'd studied philosophy, I'd studied math. Now I had wandered into computer science, which was extremely interesting and a lot of fun. And I thought, what does this have to do with life? What is this going to, it's just games with these computers. And I just ended up there because I didn't have anything else to do. So anyway, just that moment, someone invited me to Ananda, and I didn't understand a bunch of it. A lot of it seemed strange, but I was also very powerfully drawn to it. I felt these people have something that I want. And Divine Mother made it very easy for me. It's not that way for everybody, but she did for me. I had no commitments. It's not as if I was married. I didn't have children. It was easy for me to be there. Even my boss said, take a year off. We'll hold your job for you. My roommate said, I'll hold your house for you, your room for you. So I just had nothing to lose. And I went out there here to Ananda village. And it just had a wonderful experience. And I decided to stay. And at the end of those 6 months, suddenly, as if a veil was lifted, all these, doubts began to come in. I thought, now, wait a second, just when and how did you decide to throw away all these years of education you had, the successful career in the offing, all your friends on the East Coast, so doubts began to come in, and because we all have to face those kinds of questions, but Master in his grace only brought them to me at a point where I really had an experience that enabled me to answer them. And so nothing I could ever have done on my own. It felt like a miracle for which I remain grateful.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Another little question, different topic from the chat says, did Swami talk more about the prophecies, I think he means the catechisms and things, in the book The Road Ahead, or was that something he didn't talk about?
Oh, no. He had written The Road Ahead early on, well before I came to Ananda. And it's an interesting book. Crystal Clarity was of two minds about whether to reprint it. It is available now. You can get the book, and I recommend it if you're interested in the subject. The reason was that a number of the predictions that Master made and that Swamiji made weren't borne out. There were some specific predictions and they didn't happen. That did not shake. It's worth knowing that Swami noticed that they didn't happen, on the schedule that he thought they would happen. It did not shake his faith one iota in the predictions that Master made. To the day he died, Swamiji was very strong in urging us to prepare for it. And he wasn't above also using it as a way of encouraging us to consider living in community. Normally we say we should live in community. Not for that kind of extrinsic reason. Really, we come to these communities to find God. But he says it's not an entirely bad reason to come to a community, to come together with like-minded people to face times like that. Swamiji, by the way, another of his books is now called Out of the Labyrinth. It's a book that he said was one of his most important books, and that he thought it was probably not an appropriate, the book that many people at Ananda would pick up. So I don't necessarily recommend it for you. But he has a fascinating chapter at the end where he addresses the question of why even masters, the predictions of masters, can sometimes be wrong in their timing. And so I have to say, it's a deep chapter. I don't understand it very well myself, but it is a fact that even that happens. So no, he was very, very strong about it. In fact, it made many people at Ananda increasingly uncomfortable, because he would, it's not as he was a broken record. It wasn't the only thing he spoke about, but he would come back to it time and again. And what was my thought there? Or maybe that was the thought. So yeah, definitely to take it seriously. Oh yeah, what I was going to say is it was funny. There were some people who winced every time he would bring it up again, saying they were afraid this was going to turn people away from Ananda. It was a downer, I heard other people say, because he was also saying, because this cataclysm was coming, there would be a financial collapse, and that is very, what he's predicted. So it meant that no one at Ananda, even those people who had some savings, it wasn't all that many of us, it discouraged anyone from investing in the stock market during the biggest run-up the stock market had ever seen. So the financial types, were sort of wrung their hands at that. But anyway, there's the answer. But before I take any other questions, there was one thing I wanted to mention. A book of Swami's in particular that I'd like to recommend. Well, two things. One is the Peace Treaty, because the Peace Treaty is his work that really explores, in a way that he doesn't anywhere else, the idea of community, in a way that goes right to the heart. It really gives you a feeling for it. It's going to be performed, at least part of it, at Spiritual Renewal Week. And if you want to see the rest of it, it's available on the internet. And another book, Supriya mentioned, Swami said, if you want to get to know me, listen to my music. And another thing he said is that one of his books, called The Land of Golden Sunshine, was the book which more than any other really expressed who he was, his inner self. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book that also speaks to turning away from that part of the world that just is not what we were made for. So I wanted to encourage people to read that.
And those are both quite small books, The Land of Golden Sunshine and the Peace Treaty. And the Peace Treaty, to see it acted out, and I've seen it various times, is so wonderful because there's so much humor in it and there's so much truth in it as well. So if you ever get that opportunity, anyone, while you're there at Ananda Village, but also obviously it's on the internet. And do you know if during Spiritual Renewal Week, if the part of the Peace Treaty will be broadcasted live?
I'm sure it will be. I'm sure it will be. I haven't heard the details. And by the way, before then, you might be very interested to read his preface to the Peace Treaty. It's 7 pages, beautifully written, extremely interesting. And also, I pulled the, 1 or 2 short quotes out of it, but there's much in it that it's also on topic to what I discussed today.
Well, and another fun and very human thing for me watching the Peace Treaty when it is presented and as a play, because it is suddenly you don't know, oh, there's Lakshman playing a part in it. You see friends, people that we either met online or in person, there being the characters in the Peace Treaty. And that's just a very fun human kind of thing for me, because I never know who's going to be acting. It does tend to change over the years, I've noticed, the character playing. So anyone else? We would love to have a little more interaction, if at all possible, in this brotherhood community that we have here out of Texas. And yet we have Minnesota, we have so many different states online. We have Colorado, Minnesota, all over Dallas, Austin, Arkansas, Houston. Wow.
It's Eric. Good to see you, Lakshman. It's funny what you were saying about experience. It's funny, the last time I remember seeing you was actually on a bus during one of the pilgrimages, and we were both, I think you were just a couple of seats ahead of me, and we were both looking out the window at an elephant with its trunk coming toward our bus. I don't know if you remember that, but it was interesting what you said about experiences. There are certain experiences, like Swami creating those flowers gave people something that they really could feel and hold on to. And I think that's the way his music is. It inspires you even if you can't remember or know the words. And I was just thinking of the different times in my life that I really, it's like little pictures. I remember the very first time I came to Ananda, I saw Jyotish and Devi, and they were giving some kind of a seminar of some kind. Actually, this is the first time I met my wife, Shakti, and we we were both there with Jyotish and Devi, and they were just talking so beautifully, and we felt that kind of upliftment in our hearts, and that drew us together, Shakti and I. And so whenever I go to Ananda Village, in a sense, and it's been a while, I always feel that sense of
Excuse me.
I don't even have to do a retreat or a personal retreat. It just has that feeling. So I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say is Ananda is about experience, and anything that we can provide in that manner, just like this last Easter retreat, I walked into the room and I just felt the beauty of all those people there. And there was a connection that went beyond any of the philosophy or anything like that. So anyway, I just wanted to pipe that in. It's good
No, I
to see
think that
you, by the way.
I think that's very true. In fact, generally true. I think counselors out in the world advise people, if you're wondering where to spend your money, don't prioritize stuff, prioritize experiences. And those are the things that stay with us. I think, I'm sure it's memories we have of experiences in past lives that drew us back into our family this time.
Yeah, how true that is. And I remember in my first 6 months of Ananda, which I didn't come to be part of Ananda, I just came to learn to meditate. But I remember my teachers saying that, this is a tool that will give you, me, and each and every one who chooses to use the tool, the experience of, now fill in the blank, the experience of God, the experience of knowing Jesus more, depending on where we were in that moment, that it would give us that experience. And with no judgment or expectations. It wasn't, you have to do A, B, and C before you could get these experiences or come around here into this Ananda Center. It was so beautifully offered to have our own experience. And now, of course, later we know, God is guiding this. Yoganandaji and the masters of Kriya Yoga, once we decide that's what, we want more tools that are more advanced. And that's it, Eric. It's the experience that we have. And of course, the truth and the teachings and the music and the books. And we use all of that. But the experience of the divine within us, because that's who we are. So
And I do want to say the very first time I saw Swami was at Southern Methodist University. I had no idea what the guy talked about. I walked in, he was in this pure white robe playing the harmonium. But when it was over, he sat down and he sat down to sign books. And I sat down 2 seats away from him I'd never done that. I just sat there to get the experience of him. And I got up and I took $158 out of my pocket and bought his 14 steps and a bunch of other things. And I'd never known who the guy was. So I wasn't there to see him. And that was that. So that kind of experience is something that each of us shares. It's not just Swami Kriyananda, but it's everybody. That's how you, in a sense, you preach through your own energy field, your own vibration. So yeah.
Yeah, what a channel of light he has been for Master, and what a channel we are asked to be. I mean, it's our responsibility as disciples to also just be available. If Master wants to use us, be available. And Lakshman, you were available to come online with us, and we're very, very grateful for that. It's almost 12:30 here, our time, so let's kind of see if anyone else wants to, any last minute opening of cameras. Would really like to have that, folks. It is so different. Thank you, Mallory and Kevin, and here they go. You see, you gotta almost twist their arms, we have learned. Hi, Hugh and Sonia in Houston, and there's Linda. She was our tech today because Maitri and Mark are in Austin. So and there's Alex up in Minnesota, and Anyone else want to say anything before we wrap this up? Lakshman, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. There's Leah in Arkansas. We're not just Texas around here, but we do talk like Texans, right? Shall we all open our mics and let Lakshman know how we end our satsangs? Open mics, let's say it together. It'll sound crazy. Ready? Namaste, y'all.
Namaste, y'all. Yeah.
Namaste. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lakshman. Many
Appreciate it.
blessings. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Look forward to it. Bye-bye.